Something I hear a lot in Doctor Who fandom nowadays is that the Doctor can't, or at least shouldn't, be played by a woman. Such thinking was present in the fandom prior to 2017, but seems to have increased a lot since the casting of Jodie Whittaker was announced in July of that year, and continues to this day, despite the fact that Jodie has now appeared in 8 full episodes as the Doctor. But is this thinking right? Something which I think we can all agree on is that up until December 2017, the Doctor had only ever been played by male actors. That's unquestionable. But on the other hand, at no point during that time, which spanned the first 54 years of the programme's history, was it ever stated that the Doctor couldn't be played by a woman. So any argument that the Doctor shouldn't be played by a woman is more an argument from silence than anything else. Except that the programme hasn't been entirely silent on the issue. In the 2011 episode The Doctor's Wife, the Doctor tells his companions Amy and Rory about a Time Lord called the Corsair. The Doctor's explanation runs as follows.
See that snake? The mark of the Corsair. Fantastic bloke. He had that snake as a tattoo in every regeneration. Didn't feel like himself unless he had the tattoo, or herself a couple of times. Ooh, she was a bad girl.
Later, in the 2014 series, we are introduced to the character of Missy, who turns out to be the Doctor's old foe, the Master, having regenerated from a man into a woman, as played by Michelle Gomez. Then, in 2015's Hellbent, the General, who as played by Ken Bones had first appeared in the story The Day of the Doctor, is shot by the Doctor and regenerates into a woman, now played by Tania Miller, and says that she is now back to normal. So it would seem that since 2011 we have known that Time Lords can change gender when they regenerate. It might not last long. The Corsair was normally a man, but a woman on a couple of occasions. The General was normally a woman, with the Ken Bones incarnation being the anomaly. We don't yet know what the future holds for the Master, but so far he's only been played by one woman and 9 men. Jodie Whittaker is playing the Doctor for the 13th incarnation, but next time we might be back to a white middle-aged man. Who knows? Some people, though, think that the whole Time Lords changing gender when they regenerate thing is far too recent and doesn't really count as part of the canon of Doctor Who. Personally, I find this argument kind of ridiculous. We've known about this for over 7 years now. To put that into perspective, you couldn't, in 1973, have said that as we've only known that the Doctor can regenerate since 1966, it's too recent and doesn't count. You couldn't, in 1976, have said that as we've only known that the Doctor's people are called the Time Lords for the last 7 years, it's too recent and doesn't count. You couldn't, in 1981, have said that as we've only known that the Doctor's home planet is called Gallifrey since 1974, it's too recent and doesn't count. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, but I'll spell it out. Changes are made to the lore of Doctor Who all the time. Everything we know about the Doctor, his people, his planet, and the various alien races and people he meets in his travels, or her travels, was new ones. But there's probably a statute of limitations for how long something remains new, and I'm pretty sure that 7 years is more than long enough. And it's not as if the notion of the Doctor being played by a woman is particularly new anyway. In 2003, Big Finish, who own the rights to produce audio dramas based on Doctor Who, made a series called Unbound, in which they tested various what-if scenarios. What if the Doctor never left Gallifrey? What if the Doctor had never been Unit Scientific Advisor? What if the Valeyard had won? In the 6th of these stories, Exile, the Doctor is played by Arabella Weir, as a Doctor who had escaped the justice of the Time Lords instead of being put on trial. It's not the most highly regarded of Big Finish's output, but it exists and proves that the idea of a female Doctor is nothing new. Indeed, it's older than that. In the 1999 charity special The Curse of Fatal Death, the Doctor, played by Rowan Atkinson, makes a series of mistakes leading him to regenerate into a series of cameo guest stars, first Richard E. Grant, then Jen Broadbent, then Hugh Grant, and finally Joanna Lumley. Now admittedly, that was a bit of light-hearted comedy fluff for comic relief, but at the time it was the first new Doctor Who we'd had since the TV movie back in 1996, and we lapped it up. And quite frankly, the presence of Joanna Lumley as an incarnation of the Doctor was no more controversial than any of the others. But in fact, the idea of a female Doctor goes back even further than that. In 1980, Tom Baker, at a press call to announce his retirement from the role of the Doctor, announced that he wished the new Doctor well, whoever he or she may be. The reaction, predictably, was one of surprise and shock, leading to much speculation that the Doctor could be played by a woman in their next incarnation. In the event, such speculation proved unfounded. Tom Baker's successor was Peter Davison, who, as far as I know, is not a woman. But pretty much every time one Doctor leaves the role, there's at least one woman mentioned by the media as they speculate on who's next. Indeed, Joanna Lumley had been suggested as a potential Doctor on so many occasions that her appearance in The Curse of Fatal Death was less a cause for shock and more a case of, oh, at last. When the current showrunner of Doctor Who, Chris Chibnall, was appointed to the role, the sole condition he made was that he wanted to cast a woman in the role of the Doctor. One objection I've seen raised to this is that this means that he was excluding men from the role of the Doctor, and that this constitutes some sort of reverse sexism limiting the number of people who are considered for the role. This argument doesn't hold much water, because when the decisions were made for casting the previous 12 Doctors, only men were considered, thus limiting the number of people who were considered for the role. Does this not count as sexism? Indeed, it's worth bearing in mind that on at least 5 occasions in the past, only one person was ever considered for the role of the Doctor. Peter Davison, Colin Baker, David Tennant and Peter Capaldi were all the producers' first choices, as was Sylvester McCoy, although at the insistence of BBC higher-ups, producer John Nathan Turner was asked to audition other people as well as Sylvester. I believe that Patrick Troughton and possibly Chris Eccleston may also have been first choices. Jodie Whittaker was at least auditioned along with other people, and when Chris Chibnall reached the decision that she was the right woman for the job, he asked her to audition 2 more times to avoid any accusations that he was casting her simply because he'd worked with her on Broadchurch. In the story World Enough and Time, the Doctor tells Bill that Time Lords are billions of years beyond your petty human obsession with gender and its associated stereotypes. We don't really know if the Doctor considers themselves to be a man, or a woman, or something else entirely. Perhaps the Doctor is simply a Gallifreyan. For their first 12 incarnations they were played on screen by a male actor, but that doesn't mean that they were a male any more than the fact that their 13th incarnation is played by a female actor means that they are now a female. At this stage, I think the only thing we can say is that it's fair to say that the Doctor can be, and now is, played by a woman.